say that today is Yud Dalet, 14 days in the month of Kislev. From Yud Dalet we enter into Tezvav, into 15 days in the month of Kislev. And the 15th of the month has this specialty that Kaim Osihara Bashlemusa. That is when the moon is at its completeness. When is that? When it is on the 15th of the month. And this year it is particularly emphasized that Shabbos we have Yud Dalet. And from Yud Dalet we go to Tezvav, because Shabbos gives bracha to all the days of the following week, including this Sunday, which comes right after Shabbos. Many years, many times, and many months, we could have it different. We could have that Yud Dalet should be on Shabbos. We could have Yud Dalet on a Friday and Tezvav on a Shabbos. That is when we enter from the Friday into the Shabbos, from Yud Dalet into Tezvav. But now, the way it's this year, it is this month, Yud Dalet is on Shabbos, and Tezvav is on Sunday. Even though we know that we do not prepare from Shabbos to Chayil, we're not meichen from Shabbos to Chayil. But here it's a different idea. Here it's the idea that Shabbos gives bracha into Chayil. And the lesson which we take from this, like every Yidin in Torah that is supposed to bring us a lesson, is that a Yid has to know that at whatever level he's at, he still has not reached the final level of Shleimus. Yud Dalet, the 14th, it is almost to the 15th. In other words, he is almost at the level of Kaim Mesiyah Bashleimusa. But when is the real Shleimus? The real Shleimus is not until the 15th. So the same Yid has to know that whatever level he is standing at, he still has to go higher and yet higher. This has a special relation to the fact that we are in the month of Kislev, and Kislev is the month of Pnimiyas HaTorah, because it's the third month from Tishrei. Sivim, as we spoke last week, Sivim is the third month from Nisan, and that is when it is Matan Torah and Nikla Torah. However, Kislev is the third from Tishrei, and this is the month of Matan Torah, of Pnimiyas HaTorah, as it is known, the expression of Rabbi Seinu Nesienu, that when did Hafatas HaMayonis really begin with a very forceful, very powerful. This began after Yutas Kislev. And Yutas Kislev comes after we have also celebrated in a sequence order. In other words, in the order the way it is, the days of the month. Prior to that, we also had Tes Kislev. And afterwards, we had Yud Kislev. And after Yutas Kislev, we will have Chanukah, that the majority of the days of Chanukah are also in the month of Kislev. And this is the specialty of this month of Kislev. What is the lesson which we have to take from all of this? The main thing is Hamaisa Hu Ha'ikam. Maisa is what counts most. And every union is reflected in Torah, just like when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. It was Listakil Be'eraisa Bara Alma, that the Rebbe looked into the Torah. Torah was a blueprint for him to create the world. The same thing, every union we have to take the way it stands in Torah. And now is a proper and opportune time for everyone to be meisif, to increase in the learning of Pnimiyas HaTorah and the learning of Chassidus. And actually, this is the accomplishment what Timchat Mimim introduced. What did Timchat Mimim introduce? The unity, to unite Nigla and Pnimiyas. That when somebody learns Nigla the Torah, it is noticeable on him that he has a shaykhas to Pnimiyas HaTorah as well. And when he learns Pnimiyas HaTorah, it is also noticeable that he is versed in Nigla the Torah and Halacha Lamaisa, because when we comes to Chelik Halacha Shabbatayra, even though there is a Shulchan Aruch of the Arizal, but nonetheless, what is the source for Chelik Halacha of Torah? That is the Shulchan Aruch, the regular Shulchan Aruch. And now we are in Parshas Vayeshev, continues the Rebbe. Parshas Vayeshev comes after Parshas Vayishlach. Now we will be entering Parshas Vayeshev. In other words, today to Mincha we are beginning to read Parshas Vayeshev. This morning we read Vayishlach. And Vayishlach comes as a continuation to the last psukim in Vayetze, which the Rebbe explained at length last week. How when Yaakov met the two camps of the Malachim, Vayifku Boi Malachei Elikim, and he named that place Machanoim, two camps, double camping, because there were two sets of malachim that were there. There were those malachei chutz la'aretz that came to bid him farewell upon his parting from chutz la'aretz, and there were the malachim of Eretz Yisrael that came to greet him upon his entering of Eretz Yisrael. This also relates to each and every Yid, because every Yid has to know that in his day-to-day life there are inyanim that relate to both of these malachim. There are inyanim that have a shaykhis to Malachi Eretz Yisrael, and there are malachim they are inyanim that relate. There are inyanim that relate to Malachi Chutz La'aretz. When a Yid does inyanim of Tov and Kedusha, that relates to Malachi Eretz Yisrael. When he does his own matters, Bechol Drochecha, true taked is in the way of the Ehu, like when he eats and when he drinks, even though taka before he's eating and drinking he makes a bracha, which is something which even a child also understands. Child before he eats and drinks makes a bracha and addresses HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly, Baruch Ato, speaking directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But nonetheless, there are matters which are directly Kedusha, and there are matters which are Vachadike matters, but they are done in accordance to Torah. And this is the difference of Malachi Eretz Yisrael and Malachi Chutz La'aretz. And after Parshas Vayishlach, we come to the Seder which we'll be reading this afternoon to Mincha, which is Parshas Vayeshev, which Vayeshev begins with what Rashi tells us. Vayeshev Yaakov, Bikesh Yaakov Leishev B'Shalva. Yaakov wanted to sit back in peace. However, it did not work out. Kofatz olav Hugza Shel Yosef, and Rashi continues, the problem with Yosef began. However, being that this was a request of Yaakov, that Yaakov wanted to sit back in peace. True, Taka, now it was not fulfilled, but it was fulfilled to Yaakov at a later point. As we learn weiter in Chumash, Vaychi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shvayes Rishona, that Yaakov lived in Mitzrayim for 17 toiv years, 17 equal toiv. And the Toshim tell us that the best years of Yaakov were the years when he lived in Mitzrayim. And the same thing regarding us. We are also in a Mitzrayim now, because Kol HaGolius are all named Mitzrayim. What's the meaning of Mitzrayim? It's a meaning of a Meitzach. It's eng. It's an inconvenience for Yidden, because we are still in Golus, even though we are also in a position of Shalva. We're in a comfortable position, because we are living in a Malchus Shel Chesed, in a government that allows us to observe Torah mitzvahs. Not only allows us, but also helps us to observe Torah mitzvahs. But nonetheless, it's not an union of Geulah. Because for reasons which are not dependent on us, Mashiach still did not come. And especially recently, what happened, that Agudas Chasidei Chabad, says the Rebbe, got a status of a government. This is the meaning of Hamlucha v'Memshala. And who should Hamlucha v'Memshala belong to? Taka l'chaya elamim, as we said this morning in davening. So government is taka niyin that has a shaykhis to Yidden, and particularly to those Yidden that learn Primis HaTorah. And that is why, in recent days, it was accomplished that all the Svarim and the Kisvei Yad are going to be released in a format that till now they were there as a collateral, and as the halacha by a mashkin is that when somebody holds on to a mashkin, he has to make sure that it remains whole and complete and it is not damaged in any way. And this is being done midst save upon him yofis. And this is a tremendous inyan. It seems that the Rebbe is referring to, that is what people are saying, that there's a delegation of Chassidim right now in Russia, and they are involved in bringing a major portion of the library of the Frierdiker Rebbe and his father, the Rebbe Rashab, which involves Svarim and manuscripts, which are right now in a Russian library, and they are negotiating that all of this should be released, and it does help with the brachas and the Rebbe, it'll be successful, and it's going to come here and become part of the Rebbe's library. Obviously, this is what the Rebbe is referring to. As the Rebbe applied the expression that this inyan is an inyan of pidyon shvuyim, just like there's an inyan of pidyon shvuyim by people when a person who's a hostage. The same thing, these Svarim are also hostages. And regarding Pidyon Shvuyim, the Gemara says it's a mitzvah rabbah. It's a great mitzvah to release somebody who is a hostage. Same thing it is regarding these Svarim. Rabbi continued, Vayivgu by Malachi Elokim. We find as the pasuk uses by Yankiv. One of the taichnim Vayivgu is that Vayivgu is an expression of tefillah. That the Malachim came to Yaakov and the Malachim were mispalel to Yaakov. That Yaakov should help them fulfill their mission. And how does a Yid help the Malachim fulfill their mission? That is when a Yid does his mission, his avodah in Limud HaTorah. This helps that the Malachim should be able to fulfill their mission as well. And that is why, right afterwards, the Torah continues in Pashas Vayishlach. Vayishlach Yankov Malachim. And Rashi comments, what does it mean, Malachim? Malachim Mamish. That he used Mamish Malachim. Because this comes in the continuation to what we learned a few psukim earlier in the previous Chazarah. In Pashas Vayetze. In Pashas Vayetze we learn about the Malachim that came to Yaakov. Vayivgu by Malachi Elokim. So now Yaakov is using these Malachim. He's using them. They are helping Yaakov. And Yaakov, and after they asked Yaakov for help, what Yaakov is doing is he's giving them a mission. And he's sending them to fulfill their mission. And he's sending them to fulfill the mission, and he's sending them in a very distant place. Where is he sending them? Eleisav, Achiv, Artzosei, Steyeder. This is also what we have in today's Haftarah. The Haftarah comes as a continuation to the Sedra. So the Haftarah begins with Chazarah Ovadia. It's a vision from the prophet Ovadia, which incidentally, the Sefer Ovadia is a very unique Svarim out of all other Svarim in Tanakh. The specialty in it is that it has only one Pevik, which just brings out, emphasizes the Indian of Achdus. It only has one Pevik. And regarding Ovadia, we find that the Gemara tells us that the prophet Ovadia, he was a Geir. And he accomplished the Indian of his Hapcha. In other words, originally being a Goy, and later he worked himself out to such an extent that he became a Navi. And he's using the expression Chazoin Ovadia, the vision of Ovadia. The very same expression which we find by the prophecies which are being related through Yeshayahu Hanavi, because there we also find the expression Chazoin. Until the very famous Nevuah which Yeshayahu relates, the Indian of Nachmu Ami, where he's relating condolence to Yidden on the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And what do we find in this Haftarah which we read today? Also in how we reach out to the furthest point of the Goy. In other words, the Rebbe is like tying in, just like the Sedra discusses. How Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, to whom did Yaakov send the Malachim? Yaakov sent the Malachim to Esav. Same way what is discussed in the Haftarah of this week's Sedra, it's also discussed mentioning various nations that are still in existence today, like Sfarad, Spain, and other nations, until we come to the conclusion of the Haftarah. And what is the conclusion of the Haftarah? That it will be the Hoysal Hashem Amlucha, the leadership, ruling of HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be obvious and felt in the entire world, in the entire Seder Ishtalshalos, which this is actually the same idea with what the Rambam finishes a Sefer with. The Rambam at the very end of Hilchas Malachim and Mochamesein, which incidentally tomorrow we will celebrate the Siyam HaRambam, which is taking place tomorrow, the Siyam HaRambam HaYolami, which is taking place tomorrow afternoon, Mitzvah Hashem. Which, by the way, when the Rambam is talking about what the world will be like when Mashiach will come, the Rambam also brings out how then it will be Umola Oretz Deyas Hashem Kamayim Layom Achasim. We've already spoken in previous Farbrengen that the Rambam in Hilchas Shuvah, when it discusses what the world will be like when Mashiach will come, however, he does not add the words that it will be Kamayim Layom Achasim, only bringing the pasuk of Umola Oretz Deyas Hashem. However, the Rambam, when it comes to Hilchas Malachim and Mulchamesein, which incidentally the Rebbe asks, if the Rambam here is talking about what the world will be like when Mashiach will come, so why is it called the Hilchas Malachim and Mulchamesein and their Mulchames? When Mashiach will come, we wouldn't have any wars, any battles. However, says the Rebbe, it is not referring to a physical battle. It is referring to a Milchamta Shel Torah. Milchama has the word lechem in it, bread. What is bread? Torah is compared to food. So Mamela, it means it will be a battle in Torah. How everybody will be involved. in the learning of Torah. The Amam Chas v'Shalom is not referring to a physical battle. And then the world will be at its highest peak. That it will be a Mola of Deus Hashem, Kamayim Layom Bechasim, which is actually the same idea which we read about at the very end of the Haftarah of today, that it will be V'hoisal Hashem Amlucha, that the rulership of HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be felt in the entire world. The Rebbe is continuing. How we find in Parshas Vayeshev, where the Torah says, Vayeshev Yankov Be'eretz Meguro Yoviv, that Yankov asked to sit in peace. However, it did not work out. Prior to that, Yaakov sent Malachim. Where did he send Malachim to? He sent them Eleisav Achiv, Alza Seir, Steyeder. However, at that time, it was too early to take along Esav together with Yankov. However, the time which we are living in now is already the proper time that it could be Vayeshev Yaakov, that Yidden should be able to sit back in peace. It's already the proper time to reach out and come al Esav Adoni Seira. And as the Siderenu is witnessing that we have already polished our buttons, and we are ready for the coming of Mashiach. What's the meaning of polishing buttons? A button, says the Rebbe, is a mishamesh l'mishamesh. It serves to one who serves. The garment serves the person. The garment comes on top of the person. A button serves the garment. So which means that even to such an extent we are already ready for the coming of Mashiach. And it should be Pada b'shalom nafshi, as it begun in the days of Shloimeh, and the final Inyan of Pada b'shalom will be by the Gula Amitis v'Ashleima. And this is also, as mentioned earlier in the Farbrengen, that what has taken place these days, that in accordance with government rules, they are allowing for a major portion of the Svarim and Kisvayad to leave that country, and they will be arriving here. And this is what happened, that Agudas Chassidah Chabad was recognized as a government, and with their own building, and with all of their own inyanim, which is something special which has taken place now. Rabbi continued further in the Farbrengen that Shabbos, even though it's only one day, and the rest of the week is 6 days, Shabbos has this specialty, this special koyach, that Shabbos gives bracha into the entire week. Up to the following Friday. And the same thing is actually the difference between Yidden and Goyim. Even though Goyim are much more in number than Yidden, just like weekdays are more than the day of Shabbos. On Yidden it is said, Ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim, we are the least of all nations. And Goyim are larger in quantity. However, any inyan which comes from the Eibishter, we cannot say that there's an inyan of quantity which does not have quality in it. In Kedusha, such a concept does not exist. It cannot be. This is what we find right at the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev. The beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, Rashi tells us that after the Torah has told us all about Esav and his families, and spoken about Esav and his families in a very, very brief, that is when the Torah continues now and tells us about Yankov at length. So the fact that Rashi has to come and tell us that the main inyan is to talk about Yankov and not about Esav. So this in itself is an indication that would Rashi not tell us that, then I would think that there is something of significance in Esav as well. And that is why Rashi has to bavon, Rashi has to come and tell us. We should know that the main thing which the Torah is out to tell us is that the Torah wants to tell us about Yankov. Which actually This is the main inyan of Avodas HaTshuva. There's the inyan of Avodas HaTzadikim, which has to do directly with Torah mitzvahs. Then there's the inyan of Avodas Balei Tshuva, which just has to do even with Ummah Soil. And when we're talking about Tshuva, Chassidus always emphasizes that Tshuva is not necessarily an Averis. However, Tshuva Yisrael Ad Havaya Lekecha, by Tshuva, Yid has an opportunity to reach out and get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And here the Rebbe stresses again, the mere fact that we have to say that Tshuva is not only an Averis, but Tshuva is an expression of one getting close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we see that there is some advantage in the union of Tshuva and Averis as well. Because, and being that there is such a thought in Torah, even if it would be only a thought in Torah, it also remains eternal. And here says the Rebbe that any inyan which is discussed in Torah, even though it is in a very bypassing way, it's a kosal kedaitach, it's an original thought which later in Gemara does not remain that way. However, being that it is brought in Torah, it carries with it the eternity of Torah. And this is the lesson which we take from this, that we're demanding from a Yid that a Yid should have his koch be involved in the pilpul of Torah. And pilpul of Torah is primarily learning Gemara, Talmud Bavli. And what is Talmud Bavli? All various types of discussions, shakla v'tarya in Inyanim and Torah. Shakla v'tarya in Torah is not the way the halacha is b'poil, but it's discussion in Torah. Till many times we find where the Gemara uses the expression that what was just said, says the Gemara is bidusahi. Bidusahi is it's something foolish. But being that this is brought in Torah, so when we are learning it in Torah, we are learning something which has the eternity of Torah in it. And then later when we are learning what Torah says that this is bidusahi, we are again learning an inyan in Torah. And this is what the inyan of tshuva is, that there are various levels in tshuva. That tshuva can accomplish to such an extent that whatever he has done before, even though he did an inyan of an avera before, it has no longer an effect. It is no longer in existence. That avera is no longer in existence. As Chazal tell us regarding tshuva, that if one does tshuva me'ar, zdoinos, nasu kizachiyas, averas that he did intentionally are converted to and become considered like mitzvahs. Just like somebody's mekadesh as a isha on the condition that she does not have any nidolim on her. That one does not have any vows or oaths on her, and then it was proven that she does have. However, if she goes to a chacham has the power that when a chacham dismantles a neder, it becomes as if it was never in existence. The same thing is with the koyach of tshuva. The koyach of tshuva is such that when tshuva is done on an aveira, the aveira is as if it never existed. So actually what the Rebbe is bringing out here, that what the advantage that we do have in the fact what the Torah talks about Esav and Esav's children, even though it's discussed in a very bypassing way, that this is not the Ikar, but being that it is discussed in Torah, and when it boils down to the way the structure of the world is, Yidden are a minority in comparison to Goyim. Yidden are atem hama'at mikol ha'amim. The advantage in this is Avodas HaTshuva. In other words, the Avodas HaTshuva was primarily emphasized by Goyim, because this is where the inyan of Tshuva has to come in a yet stronger way, in a much stronger way. So that is the advantage of Tshuva, and that is why this is discussed in Torah, even though it's in a very indirect way, because this is not the main intention what Torah has here. The main intention is to talk about Yankov and his children, but what we get out of the inyan, how Esav and Tonvis Esav are discussed, the Alufei Esav are discussed at the end of today's Sedra, that's to emphasize the mile of Tshuva. The Rebbe continued, it is Hamaisa hu ha'ikar, and therefore, especially based on what Chazal say, that mefakrin al tzorchei tzibur b'Shabbos, that Shabbos we're supposed to take care of public matters. And from Shabbos we get bracha into the entire week. And this week, on Thursday, will be Yud Tes Kislev. Now is the opportune time to urge everyone to make sure that their proper Farbrengens, Chassidische Farbrengens made on Yutes Kislev, beginning from Wednesday night, early Yutes Kislev, and continuing into Yutes Kislev Thursday, and the main Farbrengens are usually made on Thursday night, the night from Yutes to Chav, and then it will lead it into Shabbos. So when we have 3 Farbrengens, Wednesday night, Thursday, and into Shabbos, so it's an union of Chazarah, and this will lead to it that it should be a special year, a Chassidische Yom, because Yutes Kislev is Rosh Hashanah l'Chassidus. And especially this year, this is the year that Yidden have proclaimed, that it's the year of Shnas Arenu Niflois. In other words, this is a year where it is yet higher than last year. Last year was Tehei Shnas Nisim. However, this year is Arenu Niflois. Niflois are yet greater than Nisim. So it should be Chassidische Farbrengens in the way of Niflois. And the Rebbe says the reason he's talking about it now is that we shouldn't wait for the last minute, but everybody should see to do whatever he can do, and it should be in a way that it should be noticeable that he's doing something. In other words, not something which he's keeping to himself, but it should be in a neifim of niflois, that it should be noticeable that he's involved in preparing in Chassidische Farbrengens for Yutes Kislev. And this should be done with proper resolutions that are accepted today during Shabbos, and starting to be involved in it as of Motzei Shabbos. Well, Motzei Shabbos we're already allowed to do things which we cannot do on Shabbos. And we have till Thursday, which is Yutes Kislev. And the Gemara tells us that Thursday, Yom Chamishi, there's a Gemara that Yom Chamishi, Thursday, is a day of bracha. And this comes in continuation to already what we had, Tes Kislev, and we had Yud Kislev. However, now we're talking about arranging proper Farbrengens for Yutes Kislev. And Yutes Kislev also has a shayches with the Indian of the Shiurim of Chitas, because as it is known, part of the Shiurim of Chitas is the limit of Sefer HaTanya, which Tanya we begin on Yutes Kislev, in a way that we ended up to the following Yutes Kislev. And let this lead that it should be Hikitza V'Ranu Sheikh Neofa, and the Alter Rebbe, who's the Baal Agula amongst them, together with them the Friedeke Rebbe, whose name is Yosef and Yitzchak. So that will fulfill what the Pasuk tells us, Yosef Hashem liknu shar amoy, and all of this will be done amidst the feeling of Yitzchak, which is tzchoik, happiness, simcha v'tuv levav. And again, it is kolu kol ha-kitzin, all the kitzin have passed already, and what we're waiting for is for the final step and final move that Mashiach will come, and the Geula will be nimshach lamata ma'asor tvachim, and all of this in a way of shalva, relating to the expression what Rashi says on Pashas Vayishlach, Bikesh Yankov Leisha B'Shalva. The Rebbe spoke again a few words after giving out the mashke to everyone, saying that today is Yudalet Kislev, and Yudalet Kislev has a shaykhs with the Indian of Chasana. These are special days, and with these special days, these days in itself give us strength that we should be able to utilize to awaken people for the spreading of Chassidus and for the spreading of Yiddishkeit and for the spreading of Torah. And this should have an influence on everyone, on themselves, their families, their neighborhoods, and their entire cities. And then we will be able to see the Indian of Arenu Niflois on all levels, and with the Gula Amitis Vashlema. A gute Woche und a freilichen Yutes Kislev.